Good afternoon, everyone. Great, good to see everybody. I call to order the October 4th meeting of the Portsmouth Community Network Broadband Authority. And Madam Secretary, will you call the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Barnes is absent. Mr. Glover?
Yes.
Mr. Hugel?
Present.
Mr. Moody is absent. Mr. Tillage?
Here.
Dr. Whitaker is absent. Chair Lucas Burke?
Here. All right, members, up on our agenda is the adoption of the minutes, and there's a copy attached to your packet. If there are no changes, I entertain a motion to approve.
Move to adopt. Second.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, if you call the roll.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Barnes is absent. Mr. Glover?
Yes.
Mr. Hugel?
Aye.
Mr. Moody is absent. Mr. Tillage?
Yes.
Mr. is absent. Chair Lucas Burke?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, members, we're moving on with our agenda, and next up is our topics for discussion. First up is the review process for BEAD VADI funding, and I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Cliff Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the authority. Our meeting today is to kind of go over some of the funding opportunities that we have, as well as our strategy for getting there and making sure that the citizens of Portsmouth, our local government, our businesses, et cetera, will have the best opportunity afforded to them for best broadband internet service as individual addresses here in the city of Portsmouth. I'll remind the authority that in November 2021, signed into law at that time was the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and what that was a unprecedented record amount of funding for infrastructure investment across the country. It was some $1.2 billion, $1.2 trillion in funding in all types of infrastructure, whether it was roads, bridges, all kind of infrastructure, but carved out of that also was a funding amount of $42 billion, and the purpose for that $42 billion was for broadband deployment. And I think that should emphasize to all of us just how important it is as a priority for our nation to make sure that any address, any business, any individual, that needs broadband access or access to the internet, which is everyone, that it's done in an adequate and have adequate speeds to receive that service. And so not only is it a priority for the nation, but also that funding is flowed down through the states, down through to the localities. That funding will be allocated through the National Telecommunications and Information Administration down to the states, and then at the state level in Virginia, our share is $1.48 billion. $1.48 billion. That's a correction that I needed to make to the second slide.
1.48 million
Billion.
to billion
$1.48 billion.
to the city of Portsmouth.
No, to the state,
To the state,
Commonwealth.
to the state.
Now, for the city of Portsmouth, our job, just like any other locality, just like any other region, is to take a look at the maps that were provided by the FCC. They have the official map to say where adequate coverage already is or is not, where there's areas that are served, where there are areas that are served and then they're underserved. They have internet service, but it's not adequate, it's not fast enough. Their map is the official map. Now, part of the process to get the funding is you have the opportunity to challenge the map that exists. Virginia has done a preliminary challenge because there was a map before the map that exists now. And in that, the Commonwealth challenged that to say, hey, wait a minute, we don't agree with your map. Other states did the same, And then thus, the map has been updated, and what we're working with now is roughly what is supposed to be the coverage across the country. Now, what we've done is contracted with a company, Broadband Telecom Services, who we introduced you to a couple of meetings ago, and who will also present today a few slides, to help us with that challenge process, to make sure that our citizens, our businesses know and understand where to go, how to challenge the speed that's been reported that they're supposed to have up to X amount of speeds at their location. And if that is not the case after they test, then of course that information is going to be uploaded to the state, who's going to submit it to the feds on our behalf. As I said before, the challenge actually is up to the states to say whether or not the maps and the speeds are accurate. And the only way the states will know is if the cities provide that information to them. Back in what this slide represents is an online article that was written by the Consumer Reports back in December of 2022 that warned the states that yes, you really could be missing out on billions of dollars across the states if you do not participate in this challenge process. We can't take for granted that the information that was originally given to the FCC, that is actually what the speeds are. That's why you have a process of testing your speeds. And we're going to provide for you an opportunity to know how to test your speeds and to also provide a link for you and the citizens of where to go to test the speeds, and that information will automatically be uploaded to the state, who's going to submit it on our behalf. I don't want to steal Mr. Biku's thunder, but what we plan to do is to not only submit on behalf of the city of Portsmouth, but we're going to collect that information on behalf of the city of Portsmouth, other cities in the region, the other partners in the Southside Network Authority are doing the same. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We're going to create one database with all of this information, and then that information is going to go up as a region saying, state, hello,
Yeah.
we have these problems.
Okay.
Please help us. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Jeff Biku, who represents Broadband Telecom Services. Mr. Biku.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you guys doing today? So I'm going to piggyback on what Cliff just said. This money that's out there is unprecedented, so we have to do our best to make sure we get as much of it as we can for our residents to ensure that they get the kind of bandwidth they need to just run everyday businesses. So I want to go to the next slide, please. So when we were talking about the maps, the latest map has come out from DHCD, and it has what they have classified as unserved and underserved addresses that they know about, right? So we'll go into the map in the next slide, but one of the things we're doing now is all the Southside cities, the 5 Southside cities, are collaborating, taking all this data, and the SNA is going to build a regional database that will then be used for equity and affordability measures, meaning that that regional database what we will use to get as much funding from the BEAD program as possible. So this is where it gets a little tricky. BEAD Fabric Portsmouth, as of today, so there's 33,082 served residents, right? Unserved, they're saying there's only 40, and underserved, they're saying there's only 35. This is what the whole challenge is about. There's areas once the website goes out, and DHCD they are putting the website out, so they're developing their own website that residents can go to, do a speed test, and that speed test and that data will then go back into their database, which will then we will get a copy of, and that will be used for the challenge process. each individual city, and in our case, the SNA will be doing the majority of the challenges later on when all this data comes out. But our goal is to take that number of 40 unserved and 35 underserved, and see how much more we can get from this challenge process. Because again, like Cliff said, there's money on the table and we don't want to lose it. So understanding how much and I'm sure you guys are looking at this map and saying, well, we know there's definitely areas where residents aren't getting the 100 over 20.
Right.
So it's going to be a process. It's going to be a process to get those websites out, get it out to the public, get it out to the community, have people actually go to the website, take the speed test, see what they're getting, and document it. I mean, we're going to have to do some public awareness. We're going to have a couple months to do that, but that's our goal. So hopefully, when DHCD gets all this data will then go back into, and then there will be a updated map that shows, maybe 1,000 homes unserved. I'm just throwing numbers out there. Whatever data we get back, and then the providers themselves have the ability to debug that. So that's how this whole process has to go through. But that's it. That's the updated map, and that's what Portsmouth has, 40 and 35. So hopefully that's all wrong. The next step, like I said, is we're going to be developing.
Mr.
Sorry.
Okay. I have a couple questions.
Question. Are you ready?
Yes.
A question. The 33,000, who came up with the household figure?
That's the database that DHCD has on their latest maps.
The DA?
DHCD, the Housing Development for Virginia. They're the ones that run the whole grant program for Virginia.
Okay, so are we sure that that's the number for Portsmouth? Because I'm quite sure there are a whole lot more households than that.
And we will verify that. That's one of the process. We just actually got this data a couple of days ago.
Oh, okay.
From DHCD. So that's the latest map. So understanding, making sure that those numbers are correct is one of the things we will be doing,
Right.
working with DHCD.
How do these numbers include public housing?
It's a good question. We will also find that out.
So can I,
Yeah.
if I might, Madam Chair,
Yes.
to Dr. Whitaker, the numbers that we have, the way that this unfolded, the providers uploaded what they believe the speeds were to the FCC. That created a map.
Okay.
That map was then challenged from the Commonwealth to say, we don't agree with you. We think that XYZ. Then the map was updated, but even then it was a cursory challenge. Now our job is to go back and challenge this, to say, we don't even believe this. We're going to actually do speed tests to make sure. So when you see the 35 and the 40, the 35 are underserved, meaning they have internet access, but it's not adequate speeds, or the 40 that's unserved, meaning they don't have any, and only 40 in the entire city. Well, it's time for us to actually challenge that and to say whether or not we believe it's more than that. And that's what we're going to go through the exercise. And for the citizens, they're going to have a tool to assist them in that. So instead of them having to, you're going to encourage them on how to test their speeds, document it, and then send it off somewhere. No. Once they just click on testing their speeds, it automatically, the state is going to capture what that speed was, and then that's what the state is going to report on our behalf to the feds to make this map look a little bit different, a lot more accurate. Because when you see or you hear, that there are certain speeds being provided, the fine writing that the providers give down at the bottom, it's up to a certain speed is what they provide, which means it could be nothing up to 25 megabits coming down, 3 up. So this challenge process is where it's really going to matter, that we get as much participation as possible.
So the methodology that you're going to use to determine the accuracy of these figures, what are you going to do that?
Yeah, so the state, DHCD, right, is providing, they've got a whole database, a website, and it's just our job to make sure we market that. So once we have the URL where the residents can go and do the speed test, they'll click on it, they'll say, put your address, your name, and then it'll tell you, push a button for a speed test, and that'll tell DHCD exactly what that customer at that location is getting per speeds. And then that will then be recorded into a database. And the public safety part of this, so one thing about not public safety, public housing is typically the infrastructure is there. But when you come to public housing, it's just residents who can't afford it, right? And then that's a whole other topic that we have to kind of discuss and see how it is. That goes back to the Affordability Act.
Mr. Hubel?
So that was my question. So if the service goes past my driveway, but I can't afford to have the service provider send signal into my house, am I unserved or am I served?
You're classified as underserved, right? But it's unserved, but it's a different unserved. Now you're unserved as a resident, not for broadband. There's two classifications for unserved.
Okay, and those people can't go to a URL and type in anything because they got nothing.
Exactly.
So how do we engage them?
That's a good question. We're going to have to talk to DHCD about as well. There is a certain part of this which will be identifying locations. So if there's any locations that you guys feel that this is a key area that needs to be addressed, we will do some field verifications as well and get our own data to send back. So I think one of the things we might end up doing is looking at some of these public housing locations and actually going to do some testing over there and see what we can get as well, so we can add to the database. We have a few months to get this done.
So as I recall, maybe on the front end of the pandemic, we put Wi-Fi communicators on our school buses and sent them into underserved neighborhoods to make sure that folks had access who otherwise couldn't afford to buy service from a service provider. So presumably the schools would have some kind of information.
We're also working with the schools and the school boards
How many-
to identify as much locations as we
How
can.
many hits on their Wi-Fi router, school bus Wi-Fi routers we ended up providing back then.
Any more questions?
I had a question. Thanks, my colleagues answered a couple of them already. I was wondering what kind of apparatus was used to test the speeds, whether somebody used a cell phone, or iPad, or a laptop. Is it going to be a different speed if they use one of those varying instruments to click on the link?
It will be different speeds. It will, because the laptop is, a direct connected laptop is definitely going to give you a lot better speeds than an old 3G cell phone.
Right.
But I haven't seen the website the DHCD has put out yet, because we just found out that they're the ones that's doing this.
Right.
So I think what we'll do is once we look at the website and look what they have, we'll be able to answer a lot more of these questions.
Okay.
They've been doing this for a while, so I think they're going to understand that there has to be, it has to be certain stipulations of how you're going to do your test.
Right, exactly.
Or if they're saying, or if you're doing it off a cell phone, they should say the speed test is being done off a cell phone and
Right.
here's the data.
Exactly.
Right, exactly. So that's kind of where I see it going. But we just found out. We'll look at the website before it goes live, and then we'll put our own 2 cents. We speak to DHCD on a weekly basis now, especially for this challenge process. So we'll get all the information.
Okay, and I guess you'll figure out how we market that to be able to get the information to people. Okay, all right. Dr. Wood.
Just one more question. You mentioned that this data was provided to the state by the providers. What was their incentive to undercount?
Money.
Yeah, so the providers, this is where it gets a little tricky, right? The providers don't want anybody infringing on the area. So I think we all know, Cox has been the biggest provider in this area, right? Just like Bright House in different locations and, Breeze Lines in different locations. Those are different providers that provide, they have their franchise agreements and they provide services. Their infrastructure in a lot of places hasn't been updated in a very long time. pretty much guarantee you that. So they don't want people challenging their area because they're going to lose customers. You know, because any area that doesn't meet 100/20 is opening the door up for somebody to come in there and basically say, I'm going to fix this problem and I'm going to, you know, get money from the federal government to fix it. So that's why before there used to be census blocks. So each area had a census block, and a census block was could be 3 houses, 5 houses, however the FCC decided that block was going to be, right? So there's 5 houses at a census block, and there was 1 house served, but then 4 of them were unserved. That whole census block was classified as served because the providers would report that under Form 477, and every year they would have to report all that data back to the FCC. So they would classify all those homes as served. So any grant funding coming out would not be able to get funded. So that's how this whole process started. They decided they were going to. FCC said, nope, this census block stuff is not going to work anymore. So we're going to do individual homes. We're going to do individual residents, and then create to make sure that the providers are accurately putting their data up under for their businesses. This is how the challenge process came about.
So this is a question for the attorney. So Cox and any other provider, do they have licensing agreements with the independent cities?
Yes.
So within those licensing agreements, are there cooperation language, or is there cooperation language?
For something like this?
For I don't know. That's what I'm asking.
Right.
It'll be under the franchise agreement.
Yeah, there are, under the franchise agreement, there are various reporting requirements that they have that we can ask for information from them. I don't know offhand exactly how far
Right.
that goes, but we can ask them for information.
Yeah, I was just curious within these agreements if the information that we're seeking, and that's going to be quite an involved process, and they're the ones that actually have the data.
Right.
So I don't know if there's some legal leverage there within our agreements, and I don't, that can't be answered today. I was just curious.
Yeah, I can certainly look into that. Yeah, the downside is those specific ones, the ones from entities that provide cable services, are very limited in what we can put into those agreements because it's all federally mandated essentially. But I can certainly look through those and see.
Yeah, I was just curious if that's something.
On that same note, I'll just mention, as we look at the map and the depiction of what is so-called covered served, that is what's been reported that the providers have available to offer. It's not saying that address has this speed. It's just that they're saying the speed that we provide to this area, these people, if they hop on, this is what they will have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Part 2 of that, part B, is not what they are guaranteed to get, but up to that speed. So the test is going to be the real indicator of what's actually coming from that location. And the test also, I believe, has to be done more than once. So you have to do it, I think, at least 3 times, I believe. And if you do it 3 times a day, at different times, then it's going to kind of paint the picture of what's actually happening and going to that address.
Not to mention, if there's 4 homes in that area that are all doing speed tests and they're all hitting, 10 megabits a second, that there's a problem in that area.
Yeah, same speed.
So it's all data driven. As much data as we get from these surveys is going to be what's going to make it harder for the local cable company or local provider to actually challenge it, because they're going to come back. All this data is going to come back, and then it's going to be challenged by the providers. And then if they have a valid challenge process, and they're saying, no, this area is, we said it's unserved, but you're saying it's served. If it's valid, the maps will be updated to accommodate what everything is, and then those will be the final maps that will be used for the BEAD funding.
And is there a time frame for this to be done and complete?
By February of next year is when the BEAD challenges should be, all the latest and updated maps from all the challenges should be out there.
Okay.
And that's when the providers will get the results as to what areas they are saying is challenged is served and then what we're saying is not served.
Thanks.
Yep. So yeah, back to the survey. So basically, we're going to be pulling the survey together, the data sets, and then we're going to be following up with the school board and other partners to see which locations need field validation. Like we said, we're going to be doing some field validation. Any areas you guys feel is important, since you are residents and been living here for a while, let us know, and we will actually go out and get it done. The DHCD meeting on October 12th at 10:30 will detail the next steps of the challenge process rules and maybe beat timeline. So they still haven't figured out the full timelines yet, but every couple of weeks there's another webinar that we get on to actually show us what the processes are. That's it. Any questions? Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, that concludes the presentation portion, I think, of the agenda. And then you have another item after that if there are no questions.
Yeah, if there are no other questions, we'll move to our next topic, which is the City Council resolution regarding the membership for this authority. And is Attorney Sanger or Attorney Williams?
Sure. So last time we had talked about updating the code, and council at the time didn't have a full consensus yet on what that was going to look like. So we thought this was a good opportunity to have that discussion and to be able to figure that out prior to the council meeting so that we can have that all ready in a form that would be good for council.
It seemed like the two topic areas were really the citizenry piece, which I think we've all agreed that they would be citizens of the locality of Portsmouth, and then the other portion was whether or not council members would remain on, council or not.
Correction.
Correction.
The members would either be citizens, own property, or a business
Yes, right.
person.
I meant the general, yes.
Yeah.
That is, details are important, yes. The
Connection to
connection
Portsmouth.
requirement that is there, yes. As well as whether city council members will remain on the council. As we left it at the consensus in the last meeting, we had it such that council members would remain on unless removed by vote or at the end of their term. So what that would mean is if your term ended, and even if you were reelected, you would not be reappointed after your reelection.
4-year term.
That's correct, yes. And so we felt like there might be some more discussion needed about that. So we're here to talk about that.
Okay. Members, is there any discussion? Mr.
So
Tillage.
when I had brought it up at the last council meeting, as you may mention, when we were here last, we talked about members wanting to be a part. They could have the option to stay on or stay off. And so the language that's in the resolution clearly states that no member of city council may be appointed to serve. If a member is elected to serve on school board, to serve on city council during their appointment as a as a member of this board, they're to be removed. So that means that automatically would disqualify everybody, whether we chose to stay here or not.
Oh, yeah, I was just saying, what that's trying to prevent is if somebody was a member of this board and then became a member of city council, that they couldn't then stay on both boards. That the whole idea is that this board would at some point not be a board comprised of city council. So what it states is that if a member of the board subsequently becomes a member of city council, so if this was adopted today, you're not subsequently being elected a member of city council. So that would apply to future.
It was just to keep city council members off once everybody fully matriculated on.
So is there a reason why why that would be a thing? What's the purpose from keeping members of council off of the commission?
Because that was a consensus.
Well, for the authority.
That was the consensus that was.
I thought the consensus
given.
But the consensus I thought was, if people wanted to stay, they could. If they didn't want to, I mean, that's two different consensuses. So I thought the consensus was if we chose to stay, we could. If we didn't want to stay, we could leave. That's a different consensus from saying can't serve at all. I mean, that's two different consensus.
Well, it's not that you can't serve it all, you just can't serve past your current term. Yeah.
But that's still two different consensus. And I don't remember that consensus saying this. I don't remember this consensus being.
Well, it was, but what happened is once we got to the actual city council meeting, that's when that changed. And so the council decided that we should look more into that. And so I wanted to bring it back here for further discussion early instead of at like 8:45 or whenever it's going to come up again. So
I guess my
it's
question is, when
really-
was this? When was this language consented on?
May 9th.
May the
May
9th.
9th proceeding, and then again on the last council meeting, the last PC B&A meeting, which was, Derek, do you have that date?
I think it was 12.
The 12th. So on both of those meetings, we reviewed, actually we anticipate this question, so we reviewed it just to make sure that the consensus was that council members would eventually be sort of rotated off, either by resigning, removal, or
Replacement.
provision which would end it at their term.
Well, I will say this publicly. If that was, I do remember that conversation. If I voted in favor of that, it was from a misunderstanding.
Okay.
And so I do not support that.
Okay.
And so I don't
Okay.
support it.
All right, we continue to discuss it.
Any other members have any comments?
So there's no legal issue here. This is purely the
This
desire
is just the
of council.
desire,
Right.
yeah, no legal issue whatsoever.
Right,
This
right.
is just,
Right.
yeah.
Madam Mr. Glover.
Yeah, so, I'll just articulate, my thoughts on it. I'm totally in support of, once we begin anew and we resign off of the council and we begin to appoint board members, at that point, I would be in support of council coming off. And it's for obvious reasons. The issues and concerns I think that this authority will be dealing with, if we appoint a board, that's where it needs to rest. Having council members on it, in my opinion, could present a conflict in some ways. And so that's why I believe that the best interest of serving the citizens and council with this authority would be to have those individuals appointed to the authority being a part of the authority and not council members.
Dr. Whitaker.
Yeah. Madam Attorney,
Yes, sir.
can we get some type of legal opinion on whether there's a conflict with council members serving on the commission? And I don't mean right at this
Okay,
moment.
sure. Very good.
But I think that needs, because that has been stated,
Okay.
but I haven't heard that come from your office, and I would rather us base that, on some substantive conflict language that we
Sure.
are in violation of.
I think conflict in the sense of
Well,
let me
I'm
just.
saying, you don't have to say, I'm saying that's, I
Okay.
think, I would want some thought to it, to get back with us on that, because that's been presented to the public, and I don't like us saying things that we're not in the position to say. It shouldn't be speculative.
Sure. I just want to toss this one thing out that I know my office has represented, is a concern that we have when we are confusing the role of what council has, a decision that council has to make versus what the authority member needs to make. And so sometimes we get that confused. It doesn't really create necessarily a conflict, but I think it may cause some confusion on the roles. The other part of it is when we start banding together with the Southeastern Network Authority, there are some real conflict issues that can develop there. And that would just be, we would be projecting those possibilities again. If we don't have a very specific scenario to tell you, we could speculate that all day long. it's sometimes helpful if and cleaner if council is just council and not on the authority in some of those instances. But again, we would be speculating on that point. But those are the only two things that I would just bring up for the discussion today. But I know that the council has brought up to this, our legal counsel has brought up to council about that, the authority about that.
Yeah, and I think your role also includes of counsel advising us. And so if you feel there's a conflict, either present or future.
Oh, I definitely will speak up. I definitely
Right.
do.
So I'm saying
Yeah.
that's what you just said there. You were saying when we go, regionally.
Sure.
Well, I would like, let's present those things, document that so that
Sure,
that would
yeah,
give us something to
absolutely.
consider.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That would be.
Mr. Hill.
Yeah, for clarity, our intent is to have council liaisons to the authority, right? Two council liaisons like we have to the other authorities. So there's still a link, a direct link between the authority and council, and communications going
Right.
in both directions.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just say, based on my experience with being liaison and also seeing other council members as liaison, a liaison and a member are, as we know, are two different issues.
Yep.
There have been occasions where a liaison for council has not been allowed in closed session. And that Vice Mayor experienced that. And so just because your liaison does not mean you're going to always be in direct lines of information. If things are decided to be cut off, it could be cut off because you're not a voting member of that particular board, well, authority in this case. It was PRJ in this case. Yeah.
Any other comments? Madam Secretary? Welcome. All right. Then if there are no other comments, then we'll take the information that we have and move forward with our resolution for the council to deliberate and ultimately vote.
Yeah.
Mr. Hill?
So I've not experienced the inability to go into closed session as a liaison. Could we stipulate that the council liaisons have the authority to participate in closed session with this authority as part of the language of standing the thing, or kind of turning over the membership to the arrangement that we're talking about?
I'd have to look into that issue before I can answer that.
Yeah.
What comes to mind as a potential is if there is a true conflict, you have a financial interest in a decision that's being made, then obviously that would create a problem for you
Okay.
if you, I'd have to look into that to see. It comes to mind that you should be able to do that, but there's so many different variables. I'd like to confer with my team and just make sure, but that's something I can bring back to you.
Just in the instance where it occurred, it had nothing to do with finance. It
Oh, I'm
was just
sure it
purely.
did. No, I just,
You're not
of course, I
welcome.
wasn't
Yes.
trying to implicate that at all. I
Right.
just know that those issues can come up sometimes while closed session, or if there's a.
And I guess the final comment is the authority still works on behalf of the city. I mean, they are representing the best interests of the city. Is that fair to
It is
say?
a political subdivision. It has the powers and authorities of that, but it still would work within the parameters set by council. We'd have to also consider that because it would be a political subdivision, it does have certain powers and authorities that any other political subdivision would enjoy outside the purview of council in some respects. So there's a balance there, and we'd have to really shape it to consider all of those things and address it in a lease agreement or some sort of agreement if that were the case.
Right. And the bylaws would still stand where the attorney, the secretary, and our members, staff members, would still be in their acting roles.
There would be a secretary, but I don't know if it would necessarily be Ms.
Okay.
White. I think
Okay.
there would probably, it may be
A new vote.
non-staff, yeah. There would be, I think there are members of the manager's team that would remain because of the financial piece and because of the technical aspect
Information.
of it.
Right.
But that would be at her discretion. I don't want to speak for her.
You had the floor first.
Okay.
Um,
Mr.
So looking at so the Eastern Shore has a broadband authority that consists of Northampton County and Accomack County. Their authority members consist of city staff from each county staff from each county. So you have the county administrator of Northampton County and the county administrator of Accomack, as well as other people who have complete vested interest in the counties to serve on the authorities. My concern with council coming completely off and appointing people to serve in this role is people's interest. And so by the people in those respective counties having complete vested interest in their jobs, I feel like it's more integral for them to serve in such as this. When we're talking about serving underserved communities, providing access to broadband, which, let's be real, that's a business venture for a lot of people. And so I just think that could be an option that we could take instead of just giving complete autonomy to people to serve on this authority without having any real concern for the need, and the need is not financial. The need is providing access to people who need it. And so I would ask that if we're not going to keep council members up here, that we look at an alternative way to make the board more conclusive and devoted to the city of Portsmouth.
Mr. Glover?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the things, if you could just take a brief moment, when I looked at your report back on the lease agreement, the particular caption under the lease agreement, it says for the Broadband Authority to do anything with the fiber ring, it will need to have a lease agreement with the city. Can you just, and then you go on to give some bullet points about council would need to approve the lease. A lease agreement would include provisions to impose additional rules on the authority or to ensure more oversight. Can you give us like a small example of what that would look like? Because
Sure.
if you could.
Yeah.
Kelsey.
So, you mean an example of what a provision could be that could include more oversight?
Yes.
Okay. You could include some sort of reporting requirements that they have to follow. You could theoretically limit how the powers they have in some of the state code. For example, if it made sense to limit their ability to borrow money, you could do that in exchange for the strands. I'm not saying that you could completely, or it would be a good idea to completely hamstring them. That's probably not a good idea.
Sure.
And we need to talk that out. But if there are particular things that matter to council, we can look into putting those as stipulations in a lease agreement.
And the reason why this is unique is because, and unlike other political subdivisions, we own the entity, the subject matter.
Right.
The city wholly owns that. So we have a better control mechanism over what can happen through our ownership of what is the subject matter of the purpose of the authority, which would be the fiber. And so we could use the lease agreement to be able to lease out certain powers and provisions in exchange for the access to that fiber.
I will say one thing that that brings up that makes us different than I think perhaps any other authority is that the authority itself does not own the underlying infrastructure.
Right.
There might be another authority that's set up like that, but I don't know of one. I mean, most of the authorities are combined jurisdictions, so they're like the SNA, for example, that the infrastructure they're building is wholly owned by the authority, not individual localities.
Dr. Whitaker?
Yeah, can we go back to the resolution
Yes.
issue? I would ask that my colleagues would consider deferring this vote until, because two substantive issues have come up in this meeting, and that is the issue regarding whether there's a conflict that's come up, and then also the issue of the liaison and that control and access to being involved in direct lines of information. And I would think those issues would need to be resolved before we take a vote. And I don't think we should be getting out there if that's something that we know is already existing in here. There's no need of us to take it out there to the main floor. So I would ask that we would just table it. There's no rush.
It's not.
But and I don't think we should be in a light that's going to cause it to look
With some-
fragmented.
I agree.
We do have an agreement, so we could just make that motion on the floor and
And
then
that would
we
need
would
to be done now.
give a
To
date
defer.
to
Yeah.
defer. And then I guess if we have a date, if we want
Yeah.
to, we'll need to add that to it
Date
too.
certain, yeah, we need a date
Right,
certain.
we'll have
Just
to,
whatever is comfortable with
Oh, sure.
your office.
We've got collective bargaining for the next couple of meetings, so I'll talk it over with my team and let you know when we get to them.
Okay.
Did we get a consensus on that? Is that what we're doing?
We have a consensus.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, very good.
All right, so we will defer the resolution to a date that's conducive to your team's schedule.
Great.
Okay, all right. Then if there's no other discussion on the resolution, we don't have a closed session. We don't have anything that we need to discuss. New business is any future topics that the members would like to discuss. Is there anything that we need to bring? We'll just continue the discussion regarding the bead body. So we know that that will continue until we get a resolve with that. And if there's no other topics that the members have, then our next meeting will be November 14th at 4 o'clock. Okay? And we don't have any speakers signed up. Okay? Well, if that, there's no other information before us, then we stand adjourned.